This is Rose's new Pro SL disc. The old Pro SL was one of our favourite affordable aluminium road bikes in both rim brake and disc brake configurations. This is an all-new frame set for 2020 and it's got a few key improvements, most of which affect the aesthetics rather than the actual performance. It's still a really good bike. Much like the old Pro SL, this is an aluminium frame set with a full carbon fork, but it carries off the neat trick of looking rather a lot like a carbon bike thanks to some really tidy finishing and this very shiny paint job. There is a sober grey alternative if you prefer, but really the red is the one you want. The new frame set is a similar overall shape to the original, with classic Rose styling cues like the little kink in the underside of the top tube near the front. It's still got dropped seat stays like the previous model, but they're not quite as dropped as they were before, and it flows a little more organically from top tube to stay. Where previously there was a conventional seat collar, there's now a very tidy integrated clamp in the seat cluster. The new fork is claimed to be both lighter and more compliant, but the most noticeable visual difference is that the flat mount caliper bolts now pass through the whole fork leg. That does away with the need for an adapter, it's just a little bit more elegant as a mechanical solution. Perhaps the most noticeable change is the cable routing, which is now almost fully internal. The cables and hoses run underneath the stem and go into a cover before going into the frame. The rear gear cable and rear brake hose emerge underneath the bottom bracket and run along the bottom of the chainstays, so they're pretty well hidden. The funky profiled spacers underneath the stem look like they might be a bit of a compatibility nightmare, but actually they split in half so that they don't make life too difficult when you want to adjust the stack height. Now I've lowered the stem here and put a spacer on top. You can't put the profiled spacers on top of the stem, and you'll need to supply your own standard round spacer if you want to do that, because Rose doesn't include one in the box. It's just a very minor thing, they cost buttons. Where the previous Pro SL disc had a through-axle front and a quick-release rear, this has 12mm through-axles both front and rear, which means less thinking if you ever come to upgrade the wheels. This bike has nice big tyre clearances, as you'd hope. Rose specs it with 28mm tyres, but there's room for 32s officially, and maybe even a little more if you're prepared to be a bit naughty. The geometry of this bike is classic endurance road, and it's pretty much the same as the previous version. This has 384mm of reach and 563mm of stack for a size 55, which is basically a medium. Now that's a few extra millimeters on the stack, and that's because of the new headset arrangement, but basically it is the same as the old version. One interesting thing from a geometry point of view about this bike is that the two smallest sizes come with 650B wheels rather than full-size 700C. That's to keep geometry more consistent across the sizes, and that's great for shorter riders. Another really nice size-specific feature that Rose offers is that the three smaller sizes of this bike come with a short-reach version of Shimano's hydraulic levers, which is a really nice touch because that will work better typically for the people who need those sizes. Now, when I last reviewed a Pro SL disc, I did mention that one of the only things that it felt like the bike was missing was Mudguard mounts, or fender mounts for the North Americans in our audience. I hate to say it, but Rose still hasn't put fender mounts on this bike, and it just seems like a bit of an own goal, because in every other respect, this would be the perfect all-weather bike for typical UK riding, for example. It rains a lot in this country, and if you want to ride year-round, you're sometimes going to have to ride in the rain, and full mudguards are essential if you want to be happy doing that riding. You can obviously fit clip-ons, or you can bodge various things using P-clips or other third-party methods, but it just seems a little bit of a shame that they didn't just put proper mounts on this bike. So all in all, a very stylish frame set with some neat updates over the previous model. The frame itself, incidentally, weighs a claimed 1,350 grams, which is the same as the previous model, while the fork is claimed to weigh 435 grams. I'll get to what this bike is like to ride in a minute, but first of all, let's look at this specific build. There are two models of Pro SL disc, of which this is the cheaper with full Shimano 105. It's a hydraulic group set, proper disc brakes, and nice generous gearing. That's a compact crank up front, 50-34, and a nice big 11-32 cassette at the back. There is also an Ultegra equipped model, which is a bit more expensive. There really isn't much to fault with this build. The wheels are decent DT Swiss aluminium clinchers. They're not massively wide by current standards, they're 18mm internal, but that's absolutely fine for the size of tyres that you're going to be putting on this bike. The tyres themselves are Continental Ultra Sports, they're 28mm. Now, they're not tubeless ready, but the wheels are, so if you choose to upgrade to tubeless at some point in the future, you have the option there. The finishing kit is nice, richy stuff. Particular shout out goes to the handlebars, which have a bit of sweep on them, which is very easy on the wrists when you're pootling up a climb. I really appreciate that little detail. The saddle is a very roadie-esque Selle Italia, which may or may not work for you. Saddles are a personal choice. A key point is that Rose lets you opt for either a unisex or a women's specific saddle when you buy the bike. The bike as a whole is unisex, there's nothing particularly gendered about it, but it's nice to have that option. This build in a size 55 weighs 9.4 kilos without pedals, which is not exceptionally light, but it's fine. So, what is the Rose Pro SL disc like to ride? Well, it's a lot like the old version, which is to say, very pleasant. There is a bit of an underlying edge to the ride quality that tells you that this is a reasonably affordable alloy frame, but with appropriate tyre pressures, it's a smooth, comfy ride. Ride quality is obviously subject to many variables, and you could, for example, make the bike more comfortable by going tubeless and running lower pressures, but as is, out of the box, I really can't complain about it. It's composed on rough surfaces, and thanks to the overall friendly geometry and the excellent 105 brakes, it's a confidence-inspiring bike to ride. I would certainly recommend it to a beginner, and I found that, for example, for high-speed descending where you're dodging potholes and stuff, it's a really safe, nice bike to ride. The gearing is beginner-friendly as well. A low gear of 34, 32 will get you up pretty much the worst climbs you're ever going to encounter on the road. So that's great, there's nothing that needs changing in that respect. In general, we're huge fans of Shimano 105 at BikeRadar. It's a really solid, dependable group set. It's not as shiny as Ultegra or Dura-Ace, but in terms of actual performance, it gives up virtually nothing to those much more expensive components. In raw performance terms, this is not some awesomely stiff race bike, and you wouldn't really expect that at this price. If you crank it really hard, you will feel flex either through the frame or the wheels, but the fact is it doesn't really matter. It's a really sweet, balanced ride overall, and the amount of flex that you're feeling is not going to rob you of any real performance. When I first saw a photo of this bike with the new cable routing, I wasn't totally sure about the look. I'm still not a huge fan of the side profile, but the view from a rider's perspective while you're riding is really nice. It's very, very clean, totally uncluttered, and it also has the advantage that there's no loops of cable to foul on your knees if you're out of the saddle. Another point is that if you want to run a very trendy bar bag on this bike, there's nothing in the way, which does make life a little bit easier. The Pro SL is very much a road bike, but given its tyre clearances, you might wonder if maybe it's a little bit of an all-roader or even a bit of a gravel bike. I have taken this on gravel, and to be honest, it's not terrible. Given that it only has 28mm tyres and I'm running tubes, so I wasn't going super low on pressure, it was pretty good. On more washboarded sections, it was a little bit wearing. I wouldn't want to do a really massive ride like that. But if, for example, you did stick bigger tyres on this and go tubeless, it could be significantly more comfortable and genuinely versatile. Of course, you could argue then that maybe you'd be better served by a different bike if that's the type of riding that you want to do. But I really like road bikes that have a bit of extra versatility without being full-on gravel bikes. Prices on a lot of bikes have crept up in the last year or two, and the Pro SL disc is no exception. This bike with 105 costs €1,599, or £1,450 approximately. Prices in the UK do vary a bit because of the exchange rates. I still think that's very good value for money. You could opt for the Ultegra model, which is less than £300 more expensive. It'll be a little bit shinier, tiny bit lighter, but I would question whether or not it's worth it, because in its current form, this is such a good bike, and really how much are you going to gain? You might also consider saving some money and going for the rim brake per cell, which in the past we've tested and has been an absolutely lovely bike. I'd still definitely consider doing that. The rim brake 105 model is roughly £400 cheaper, which is a pretty huge saving. If you're mainly a fair weather rider, or you're on the lighter end of the spectrum, you might see less of a benefit to disc brakes. Disc brakes are better, don't get me wrong, but on the other hand, the rim brake model will be lighter and it is significantly cheaper. The one meaningful downside of going for the rim brake model is tyre clearance. Officially, Rose says the rim brake version only accepts 25mm tyres. I suspect that's slightly conservative. I'd be surprised if you couldn't get a 28 on it, but still that's quite a bit less than the official 32mm of this bike. If you're sticking to tarmac only, that probably won't bother you, but if you do want to mix things up and go a little bit off-road, as I did, then the disc brake model will serve you better. All in all, the Rose Purcell disc is an excellent bike, and I think it will suit both beginners to the sport and experienced riders who need one of these in their shed. I'm still furious at Rose for not putting fender mounts on the new bike, but that aside, it's an excellent all-round machine with no real faults, no gaps in the spec that need filling. So, what do you think of Rose's new Purcell disc? Do you want to see more affordable road bikes like this on the channel? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that little bell icon so that you get notified about all of our new videos.